Amy Contreras from Uber Freight, Jennifer Heinzen Krueger from Ahold Delhaize, and Tomissa Smittendorf from Kellogg Company. And we have Daniel Kimble, the CEO of Resonance Executive Coaching, is going to moderate the panel today. It's going to be a really good one. Daniel is, he's an executive coach, keynote speaker, motorcycle road race winner, and a 30-plus year veteran of Silicon Valley. And Resonance Executive Coaching, it's a global executive coaching firm, specializes in leadership development, team improvement, and culture change initiatives. And rather than taking up a whole bunch more time with the bios for the panelists, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Daniel to get us going on this fantastic panel. And they're going to be talking today about optimizing the value of L&D. So Daniel, go ahead and take it away. Get us started.
Thanks, Bobby. I appreciate that intro. I too want to just jump into things here. So in our prep conversation, we had a lot of interesting conversations around digital adoption and how that has accelerated in the time of the pandemic. I'm curious to kind of kick things off, if we could all just share what you're seeing in your organizations as far as digital adoption in the last year or so. Tomissa, you want to start?
Absolutely. What a time to be in learning and development with all this disruption, with this awesome digital platforms and things like that that are out there. It's challenging, but I find it just so much fun and energizing to continue to learn more about what's going on. I'll tell you at Kellogg, what we've done in the past year, we've implemented a digital app. And it's a mobile app that our leaders can use on their phone. And what's really nice about it is that the company that we've leveraged, we can either create our own content or we can actually leverage the content that they've curated. And so we're finding that it's really engaging. People can use it, whenever they want it. It's there. We've developed weekly learning paths. We can nudge them. It's got awesome dashboard information. So, that's the great thing about all this technology is just, you've got all this information at your fingertips, right? And you can just leverage it. And the key is to share these best practices like we are in a forum today, so we can kind of all learn from each other of, what's working and what's not.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Amy, you want to comment on what's happening in your organization?
Sure, yeah. I mean, obviously, to echo Tomissa, it has been quite the roller coaster ride over the last year. And we have really leaned into technology and digital adoption to help enable our learners. Our business at Uber Freight has been busier than ever through the pandemic. So where some other industries were dipping, trucking and logistics was skyrocketing because of everything that's been going on in the wider world. And so change has been coming faster and faster for our employees, and digital adoption has really allowed us to help our employees keep up with the constant barrage of change, new process, new tools, et cetera. We implemented a digital adoption platform called Spec-It, which is integrated in to all the tools that our ops and sales employees use in their workflows. And that surfaces real-time, quick hit learning in the tools, everything from walkthrough guides to searchability to pop-ups and reminders. Weather's a big factor in the world of freight, and we have to be able to pivot on a dime. Digital adoption allows us to make sure emails don't get lost in the ether, and we can prioritize what matters most for our employees and help them not have to go through that mental lift of sorting through hundreds or thousands of emails to say, what do I need to focus on? Another place we've really seen some great adoption is through our learning experience platform that we launched in early 2020. We use the platform Degreed, but we partner with a ton of vendors through Degreed. So LinkedIn Learning, Mind Tools, Harvard Business, and really focusing on like micro learning, self-serve learning through these digital spaces. Because we know that what one learner's skill needs are totally unique from the others. And part of our digital adoption strategy has been giving people time back. So stopping that kind of laser focus on, we must be on Zoom together, we must be in this virtual instructor-led experience together, giving people time back and really allowing for more of a self-paced, quick hit, micro learning approach. And I'd say that those two tools have really been central to our strategy in implementing that.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. Jennifer, what's your experience in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the past year, especially digital adoption, I think much like Amy and Tomissa have said, has really played an important role. Looking at some of the strides that we've made and some of the changes, we had our first experience with a digital adoption platform just about a year ago. And what was absolutely incredible was how much time, as Amy mentioned, it gave back to our learners. So we were rolling out a large scale initiative with a new system implementation. And looking back just maybe 4 years ago or 3 years ago, if we were to have done that, we would have engaged the learners in video sessions. We would have given them quick reference cards. We would have had a variety of different learning tools for them to engage in. Some of them very time consuming, just attending webinars to learn how to walk through a system. But now looking at digital adoption, so much of what we used to do can really be left and really just put more focus on the digital adoption. It was incredible to see how readily accepted digital adoption was by our audience. That was one moment of apprehension we had, right? So in our space, we're in grocery retail and omni-channel retail. We have so many different locations. One fear was if you switch to digital adoption and people are in a location without support, how will it work? How will they be? Will they be comfortable? Will they be able to do what they needed to do? And what we saw was not only were they able to do what they needed to do, but the support that they received through the digital adoption was so much more in line with the experience I think that they were looking for, and that maybe they just hadn't articulated before. So it's a real game changer. And also looking at this point in time with just so many people working remotely, it's a huge support.
Thank you. I'm curious, as your companies have made the switch to much more of a remote environment, both from a learning perspective and a general operations perspective, what are some of the challenges you've run into and how did you overcome those challenges? Tomissa, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, there's always lots of challenges, right? And honestly, it's going to be really interesting to see how we evolve in the new normal and what sticks and what we go back to, because I think that will be a little bit of a challenge in itself. We've been really blessed to the fact that we've had, a blended learning format for a long time. And so we'll continue to do that and continue with that approach going into this new norm. But gosh, I don't know that we'll ever truly go back to all the in-classroom trainings that we've done in the past. I think, we'll really focus in on where it matters most to have people come together. And then we'll just continue to leverage the technology. I think one of the challenges is we don't have an LXP platform right now. And so for us, hearing all the great things from Amy and Jennifer, I feel like we're at a little bit of a disadvantage, but we are getting there. And so I'm anxious to, as I'm learning all the things that are out there and can be accessible right at your fingertips, I'm excited about that.
Thank you. Amy, what's your experience been as far as challenges go with digital adoption in the last year or so?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to what Tomissa mentioned, we've always leaned very heavily into a blended learning experience. And I would argue that we probably leaned a little too heavily on instructor-led in the past, as we've uncovered from COVID in the past year. But there are absolutely some challenges that I think we have to be really honest about, and that these tools that are fantastic, like I mentioned earlier, we use Speckit for our digital adoption platform. We use Degreed for our learning experience platform. These have social elements to them. You can like it, you can share it, you can make comments, you can use emojis, all that social technology-driven communication. It doesn't replace the camaraderie that comes out of being in a live session with other people. And it doesn't replace the cohort experience of being a new hire and going through that new hire onboarding experience with the same 30 or 40 people. And 6 months and a year later, even if you're in totally disparate roles, you see them and you say, hey, new hire onboarding buddy. And that connectivity to the business and that personal stake in interacting with others. I think, the online technologies, Zoom, Blue Jeans, WebEx, whatever tool you use, they all have solutions like breakout rooms and different ways to try to overcome this. And I certainly think all of our learning teams have stretched themselves over the last year trying to find those ways to foster more of that connectivity. But no amount of emojis replaces human connection. And we've noticed that, I hate to say the dreaded word Zoom fatigue because people are so sick of hearing about Zoom fatigue. But as Zoom fatigue continues to increase, and it will continue to increase until people go back into the office, people are also less likely to hop on and just connect with someone and try to find an interaction and, grabbing someone and walking and getting a coffee or doing small group discussions or partner discussions are much more forced or heavily curated in this current digital environment. And it is a loss in terms of the personal connectivity that we do see from a traditional classroom style or instructor-led program.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't seen any really good solutions to that. I think we're all, as you said, fatigued of the phrase Zoom fatigue. At the same time, it's very real. And I feel like people are kind of stuck around what do we do now in this interim period as we're not quite in the new normal yet, but we see the, pretty bright light at the end of the tunnel. What can we do? What have you seen work well as far as engaging people in those personal connections that are lacking for the last year or so? I'm curious to hear from all the panel.
Daniel, I'll just jump in here to build on what Amy said. Speaking of the Zoom fatigue, we implemented virtual reality with our retail onboarding team. And, originally before COVID, we were going to have the headsets and do the fully immersive, piece of it. But then we pivoted to do 3D. And that's been really awesome because we have all of these stores already set up through our category management team. And so, it's really cool to be able to do that. And it's something different because you're really focused in on that journey as a new hire going through our 9-step store call process. So being able to have, those store sets already set up obviously helped us, but we saw the engagement rise on that without having to be face-to-face. Certainly, if any programs come back face-to-face, I'd love to see our new hire program be back face-to-face, but we can certainly still leverage all the VR technology that we've implemented. So.
Thank you. Yeah, what you're doing with VR, I find that very interesting. I think it's another great example of how digital adoption is accelerating. I think that can be very useful because it's more of it feels more like a role play or more hands-on, if you will, right? And I think it's more interactive and more the best substitute that I've heard of so far as that connection with people that were lacking with no face-to-face or limited face-to-face connection. Jennifer, I'm curious to hear from you with your organization. What have you seen as far as challenges and how have you overcome them? But also any experiences you've seen as far as what works well to, as best as we can, mimic that human, connection that we're all lacking at this point in time.
For sure. I think, we face some of the challenges that Tomissa and Amy mentioned, just really trying to find the optimal way to still deliver learning in a way that is engaging and developmental and also that's sustained, right? Without that personal connection. I think there's a couple of things that we've seen that have worked fairly well. Looking at some of our programs now, we've tried to take some of the content out of the program time and instead provide it perhaps through some things that can be done, with the participants on their own time, whether it be to watch a video of content that would have actually been shared in the program itself, and then reserving that time in the program when they're all in Zoom to actually have dialogue and really engage with each other. It seems to create a little bit more of a personal atmosphere in the sense that there's not as much sending and there's a lot more engagement between the participants. The part that I have to share, we're still really struggling with and trying to find innovative ways to support is really some of that contextualization that used to happen in cohort programs. I'll be honest, I don't think I ever fully appreciated the value that the lunches, the dinners, and the coffee breaks provided to the learner, aside from the nutritional side. But there was so much dialogue that would happen in those moments where the learners informally could really talk about what they just heard, what they just experienced, what their thoughts were, how they would bring that back to work. And to have that very casual, unstructured time, that's one thing we are still exploring different options. We've tried, having programs open the room a little bit early. The group can come in, they can bring their coffee in, they can chat while they're waiting for the session to start. It helps a little. Is it the replacement? I wouldn't say it is.
Yeah, and Jennifer, oh, sorry, Daniel, if I can just add to what Jennifer just said, that is truly one of the things that I could just amplify that. We never realized truly until COVID. We've always intellectually known how much of the learning happens on the floor or, thinking about the 70-20-10 model, but that ability to just turn to your left and turn to your right, and even the smartest of people might not catch something that their facilitator says, and they can just look at someone and say, what was that? Can you help me with that? And those little organic moments are just really challenging to create. We've established like Slack strategies, which is our chat function. We've also established buddy strategies where we're pairing people with like a mentor or a buddy in their space, but we continue to find people struggling to feel confident to reach out in the same way that they would if they were sitting next to the person in a room or at a lunch table.
It's funny, if I think back before the situation with COVID, I think there were times we would seriously consider, could we take all of our learning online? Like, is that the future? And we're starting to see there are some things that do work beautifully in the online environment, and you can do them digitally. But that full experience of really immersing in content and getting the benefit of peer learning, it's very different, very, very different.
It's interesting because I've heard, thoughts and thought leaders over time prior to COVID, theorize at least what you're alluding to or talking about directly, that maybe we could transfer all learning online. And I think there's definitely a place for that. No question about that. I think we've recognized a whole lot more opportunities there than we ever thought necessarily existed. At the same time, I think what I'm hearing from this conversation in part is that we're also recognizing a year into this, remote learning environment that there are limitations that are very real. And I think it's an interesting benefit of the pandemic, if you will, to both have it forced upon us and see how it all works out in a much more deep way, and also see some of the limitations. Now that I'm curious, as you look ahead, sometime probably later this year, at least in the United States, and certainly by next year, I see us getting to some new version of normal. It won't be the same anymore. It'll be something different. I think it'll very likely, almost guaranteed in my mind, be more of a hybrid model. As you look ahead to later this year or sometime next year, what do you see carrying forward in terms of digital adoption? What do you see maybe not working so well as we get back to some level of face-to-face contact that we're not having too much of now?
I'd be happy to start us off on that one. So just thinking about some of the things I think will carry forward. So first of all, looking at a digital adoption experience platform, I definitely see value there as it relates to technology support, probably even further into some technical ways of working, performance support. I think those tools can really have an impact. And I think the situation with COVID has really accelerated the adoption there. Some other things that I think we'll continue to see stay in the environment that I'm in. I think we'll continue to see a stronger utilization of tools like Microsoft Teams, like small discussion cohort groups as a part of our programs. And I think we'll go back to having some of the in-person, right, where it's best suited. And maybe from what we've learned through this time, find a way to even accelerate the benefit of that time together through utilizing some of the technology. Those are a couple of reflections I have. I'm curious what Amy and Tomissa think.
Amy, you want to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I would absolutely agree, Jennifer, that I think the digital adoption learning experience is highly relevant regardless of whether we're in this virtual space or if we're in office. And actually, we also see digital adoption as a change management agent. Our business moves very quickly. So again, in terms of helping folks prioritize what to be focusing on, recognizing that people can't keep track of 50 changes at a time. And we see digital adoption as the tool to help folks access what they need when they need it in the tools that they're operating in. So absolutely that carrying through. One of the big changes that we made, though, as a result of COVID is programs that we historically had offered maybe like 3 sessions for. So we have a mandatory product training experience that all of our non-technical teams have to go through on a monthly basis in order to use and sell the products that are required to do their job. Previously, we would host a few of those sessions. They were mandatory. You had to make it work. We converted those to e-learnings, and they're self-paced. They have videos and assessments and quizzing and simulations tied into them. And the results have been phenomenal, because if I'm confused on a section, I can go back and redo it, or I can play in the simulation a couple of times, and Bobby and Susie on either side of me aren't making fun of me for why I don't get this tool. So there are certain programs that we virtualized fully into either an e-learning or micro-learning approach that we plan to keep that way regardless of where we are. I do also think something that will carry forward is more micro-learning. I don't know about the other ladies on the call, but I know I can raise my hand and say we had many full-day training programs before, if not, depending on the context, full week programs. And we've shifted very aggressively into a micro-learning or a just-in-time approach across all of our content. And we will continue to go down that path just to make things less overwhelming and stop making that formal learning experience drinking from a fire hose, and making it much more of that self-paced micro learning as you need it to really create a better learner and employee experience overall. So I think that's going to be another one that we very intentionally carry through with us.
You know, one of the interesting outcomes to me is we've all talked for years about integration of learning in various phrases or various words. How do people take what they've learned in a workshop or a class or a coaching session, whatever it might be, and then apply it in their day-to-day? And that to me is ultimately the measure of success, like the learning that they've taken. Have they actually been able to successfully adopt that in their day-by-day, minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour interactions? And think it's been forced upon us, this situation, in many ways, of course. And one of the benefits of that being forced upon us, we all recognized pretty early on that we can't do what used to be a one-day workshop and do that virtually. It just doesn't work. We've instead, in my business, for example, we've broken that down into 4 90-minute sessions spread over maybe 6 weeks or so, with integrative homework that happens in between. And in many ways, it's actually a more effective model because people have a chance to practice it, see what worked, see what didn't work, come back and talk about it the next time. And it's not just a one and done kind of situation where, as you said, they're drinking from the fire hose for 8 hours and they can only take in maybe 90 minutes or so of content in a given day.
Right.
Tomissa, I'm curious to hear from you as far as what you see carrying forward in terms of what we're doing now with digital adoption. What's going to last once we get back to some new version of normal?
Yeah, we're going to continue with that hybrid approach, right? And have different blended learnings. Amy, you spurred my thought on the micro learning. So for instance, we've been doing this 2-minute drill to our retail organization, and it's literally 2 minutes, right? And it's either an extended learning, something that they've already learned from one of our other e-learning modules or workshops, or it's a call to action. Say if we've got innovation breaking in the stores or something like that. So I will tell you, we've had it for a couple of years, and we started to drift away a little bit, and our retail organization was like, we want that back. They absolutely love it. And our view rates continue to be really good. But, I go back to, it's 2 minutes, right? And so it's that shortened nuggets of information that they need to know. But yeah, we will just continue to go down that path of the blended learning. But Jennifer, to what you said, and even earlier, Amy, what you were talking about, we're reimagining our onboarding process. Instead of having folks come in for 3 or 4 days and just giving them all this information and these PowerPoints and things like that, we're really trying to reimagine what that looks like. So what do we do, before we would get them together, during, after, and instead of doing it maybe every quarter, it's every single month. And we give them a little bit of information when they need it. So going back to that point of need. So we're really, it's made us step back and really reflect on what's working and what could be different, moving forward, just based on all of our learning. So again, it's another exciting time to do something different and, really make a difference.
Thank you. I want to switch gears a little bit. It seemed like in our prep conversation, there's a pretty clear consensus that you've all experienced more executive engagement and buy-in and conversations around your learning and development initiatives. I see nodding heads. I think you're agreeing with me. If you can comment on that, what have you seen change since the pandemic started, and what has become possible, perhaps that wasn't so possible before without increased engagement? Jennifer, you want to start?
Oh, sure. I mean, I've been fortunate in Ahold Delhaize. We've always had a lot of strong support for learning and development. Whether that be for our, store associate, functional training programs, or whether it be for our executive education, there's always been strong support. What I have noticed, though, is there's definitely a stronger pull for, innovation. I think that we are now a little bit more comfortable to take some of the risks that we might have been a little bit more planful or hesitant with before. So even just thinking about one experience as we entered this situation with people working remotely, we were in maybe a bit of a unique situation compared to some companies, in the sense that, much like Tomissa described, like, we were very, very busy at that point in time. And we really wanted to make sure that we could support all of our associates who weren't used to working remote and play such a critical role in supporting our stores. And our stores were really playing a critical role in supporting our customers and communities at that point in time. As we explored that, we wanted to try a micro learning journey. And I think before COVID, that's something we would have spent a lot of time planning out, piloting, gathering feedback, going through multiple iterations. And in this situation, I think within a period of 2 days, we launched a curriculum to help our learners with some tips on how to, we started with the very basics. We recognized that everyone was in a bit of a spin, right? At the end of one day, we're informed that, we would have to work remotely. We might take that for a few weeks, not quite sure. Everybody goes home and realizes, how do I do this? I might have responsibilities in my home now that I didn't have in my office. Maybe I have children who are attending school and they might need my help. Or maybe I have elders in my home who I care for and they can't go to the programs that they might have gone to during the day. How do we help our learners just settle into the new situation, recognize this is unusual? And that micro learning journey, what was incredible, we thought, okay, we'll start this. It'll last a few weeks. It'll help everyone with just some tips and tricks. How to use Microsoft Teams if you haven't before, how to set up your home office, how to find a quiet place in the chaos if you need to. And what happened was the appetite for that learning journey just continued to grow. We went from a few hundred people taking a look to well over 25,000 now who have engaged in some way, shape, or form in this micro learning journey. If I think back, the executive support was there. It was very much, do what you think is right and do what you need to do, and we're here to support you. In the past, they were always there to support, but I think they would have wanted to play a more prominent role in the decision. And I think there was just so much happening at that point in time, back in March and April of last year, that it was also liberating in a way from a decision-making perspective. I think the organization felt very comfortable saying, we know we have great talent. We know you know what you need to do. If you want to experiment, no one knows the right thing to do in these moments, right? Let's take an educated guess and learn together. So that's one of the differences that I've noticed. And I hope that stays with us.
One of the phrases that has come to mind for me a couple of times in this conversation, especially with what you were just speaking to, is necessity is the mother of all invention. I think, again, we were all forced into this situation. And in your situation, it sounds like there was a significant increase understandably so, and risk tolerance around online learning, for example, or I'm sure other initiatives as well. Amy, what are your thoughts? What have your experiences been as far as increased engagement from the senior leadership team, and how has that made some things possible that maybe weren't possible before?
Yeah. So actually, very similarly to Jennifer, we've always had, very much from the beginning of when we established our learning and development team at Uber Freight, a high level of buy-in from our executives. And we reinforce that through a flywheel where we see, we get the leadership buy-in, we get the training programs, we show the ROI, and the satisfaction of the learners get that buy-in, and it goes round and round. And so I think pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, we already were operating at a very deep level of buy-in from the executive level. I actually think where we have seen bigger buy-in increases is from the frontline managers. Mm-hmm. So historically, training might have been perceived as like, oh, you're taking my people away from their core jobs. When they're in training, they're not answering the phones, or they're not, in our case, booking loads or whatever other thing it might be. And so our executive buy-in has remained high. And from an executive perspective, they really viewed learning and development as a stabilizing function through the COVID experience, where people can trust that they are going to get resources. They can trust that they have a team who's going to support their questions, or, drive them to the tools that will help them. We actually had originally proposed a much bigger cut of virtual instructor-led learning, and our whole executive team was actually very against it. They said, no, please keep it, because the learning experience feels familiar for our employees. It feels safe. It feels like something they can trust in all this uncertainty. So that remained very high. Where we have seen just a skyrocket of buy-in is from our frontline managers. Our requests for training content, training programming, training support have gone up in some teams as much as 200%. And so it has just escalated, and we're fighting this. And I tell my team all the time, it's a good battle to fight. We are just living in the land of ruthless prioritization, where we constantly have to say, what is the most critical thing? What can live in the, digital adoption platform? What can live in the LXP? So where we've seen the buy-in increases is through the managers, who are just realizing how much teams and frontline workers are responsible for understanding and executing on in a day-to-day environment, and really feeling that gap of, we don't have the ability to manage by walking around right now. Sure. Can you go through and Slack every single one of your team members and check in on them? Or can you do a bunch of 5-minute Zooms? Technically, yes. It doesn't hold the same value to check in on knowledge or provide those quick hit updates, et cetera. So we've actually seen our frontline managers have a much deeper need, and they are getting more involved as well, which I think is the other always exciting thing. I know anyone in our space is always fighting for great stakeholder partnerships or great subject matter expert partnerships. And we now have, expanded significantly our core unit of folks who are willing to give feedback on content, who are willing to come in and be guest speakers, who are willing to be recorded on a video, or whatever other approach it is. And it's because they have understood the value of getting people that right education up front and helping them not feel like they're spinning their wheels in terms of trying to find the resources that they need to do their jobs well.
Yeah, again, I'm struck by, in part, what you said. One of the things that comes to mind is something similar. Necessity is the mother of all invention. So I think frontline managers in particular, it's where the rubber meets the road. They typically have a lot more interaction with their employees, as well as potentially staff, or customers, I should say, depending on their environment. What have you seen as far as, I'm going to double click on that. Like, what have you seen as far as the necessity has increased, but what have you done with an L&D to meet the need? Because let's say that the necessity or the recognition of the need increased. I think that's fairly clear. But if your team was not able to deliver that, what they perceived as valuable trainings, that might have been short-lived. So what have you changed, or what's been done? What have you seen as far as improvements or feedback, or anything else you can comment on about how you might have had to pivot to meet their needs, given that you probably didn't have a lot of content yet about some of the things we're faced with, right? So what can you say about that?
I'd say that we've really focused in on the transfer climate analysis and what it takes post training, because this has always been, I think, very near and dear to any learning leader's heart, which is we can build the best training in the world. We can give you the best resources in the world. If you do not talk about it after, or if you do not hold your people accountable to it after, we just wasted everybody's time. And so one of the things that we've really focused in on with the content and meeting in the middle and getting this involvement is doing a much better job. And this is absolutely something my team is going to take forth with us, is doing a much better job of getting those commitments up front and saying, if we choose to prioritize this, you need to be committing to these things post the program. And really, because the need has been so high, we've seen much better follow-up and follow through post program. Because if you fought hard enough to get your request on the roadmap, then you know you have responsibilities afterwards. And so I think that's been really amazing. One of the other things that we have done as well is implemented what we call various certification or CHAMP programs, where we empower people from the front line, because we don't want to create every piece of content, nor should we. We're not the experts. But what we have been able to do is kind of expand the reach and the philosophy through various CHAMP programs. So Spec-It, which is our digital adoption platform, we have Spec-It champs interwoven throughout the business. So if you come to us and maybe we can't help you with it, or our roadmap is full, or there are other more higher order priorities, we can connect you with other tools and resources throughout the business. So it's not just L&D, there are other people and, amplifying our impact. So it's not just one person, it's 10 people, or it's not just 2 people, it's 20 people. And that has also, I think, helped leadership, frontline leadership especially, give their people development opportunities to take on a little bit more, and also influence what content is out there, and realize it's not just L&D's job to build content or to share content, it's everybody's job. And that includes all those frontline managers.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. Tomissa, what's your experience been with your organization as far as increased executive engagement, and what's maybe become possible or more possible because of that?
Yeah, I just want to add to Amy's last comment there. There's nothing better than having champions of learning throughout the organization, right? They're your biggest cheerleaders. And when you get them engaged and help either pilot the program, facilitate it, whatever, it's awesome. It's just explosive excitement. Just to answer your question, Daniel, we've had great support from a leadership standpoint. One of the things that myself and my team have done a really good job of is really to position ourselves where, how can we help solve business problems? And so if we're working really close and engaging with our organization, if we're helping to solve those business problems by building capability in different areas, that's where you really see the partnership, and you can be part of that transformation. And then it's no longer just an L&D initiative, right? We're really helping to solve business problems. And I think the other thing, we developed a learning and development value proposition, and everything is really tied back to having intentional learning going on and putting that ownership back, to the employee about having that intentional learner mindset. And I think that's been extremely valuable.
Thank you. I'm curious, as we move forward, I'm pretty sure within the next 12 months or so, again, we'll be settling in, probably already have settled into some new version of normal. And right now, given the pandemic and all the urgency around that, it makes perfect sense that there would be increased executive engagement and L&D initiatives. And one of my questions is, how do we keep that? How do we sustain that focus? How do we go, a year from now when the pandemic's not quite so urgent, maybe it's getting into our rearview mirror, at least in the United States, and especially say 2 years out and beyond, what can we do within L&D to help sustain that interest and continue to get that attention when there's not so much urgency around the COVID pandemic?
I'd be happy to share a couple thoughts there. Looking at some of the things that we're doing in our organization, and whether they work or not, we'll have to come back and connect on that in a year or so to say. But we've really started to take a very enhanced look and more planful look at the future of work and what does that mean, and looking at the capabilities that'll be required for the future of work. We're also looking at how do we take those capabilities into some of our regular planning processes, right? So business leaders would have easy visibility into where their capabilities are today. Also, over time, once we got there, right, where they were a year ago, how those capabilities have grown, where they need them to be in a few years' time, and some of the initiatives that are underway to help foster those capabilities. We really believe that the clarity on the capabilities will make a very big difference for our leaders, because it'll help them, I think, really articulate where the function of learning is supporting them. I also think it's really important for all of our associates as they think about their future careers and where they want to learn and grow, to have that clarity around the capabilities that, maybe are really important today, and not so important in the future, or the capabilities that, we're starting to learn about today, but when we look to the future, they may be foundational. So that's one aspect that we're looking at to really keep the lens strongly focused on learning and development, and how do we help our associates continue to learn and grow. And we've got a lot to figure out in that space too, right? What are the best tools to help to engage learners in that content? What return on investment do those kind of programs have as we watch that skill gap close, hopefully? And how do we have those right conversations with the leaders that they feel, I'm going to say, fluent in the capabilities, right? That they're not something that's an HR creation, so to speak, but that the capabilities are something that they really see their own words in, and they really feel that it fits their function and they own it. I'm curious about Tomissa and Amy's experiences as they're looking to keeping the future lens on training and development.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here. That was great, Jennifer, and it spurred my thinking about, I've always had kind of the 1 year path of these are the capabilities that we're going to focus on. And so now I'm starting to think, okay, we train our organization to work with retailers and say, let's look 3 years out, and what's our 3-year strategy going to be with our customers where we find joint growth. And I think about this year, I want to do a 3-year strategy of what learning and development, what capabilities we want to build. So not just over the next year, but let's look 3 years out. And so it's challenging, it's fun, all in the same, time frame. But it's really understanding what are we going to need? Not only what are those gaps are today, but where do we need to go 3 years from now? So
yeah, and
that's how I'm keeping it alive.
Jennifer and Tomissa, I love hearing how you're thinking about that longer term, future facing approach. Daniel, I'll take a slightly different tack to your question, which is COVID created this urgency, and it reinforced this buy-in, and we had the lens on L&D maybe in the most major way in the last several decades, right? My argument to that question, not that it was to pick an argument, but there is always urgency. There is always urgency in business. It's just about us as learning leaders taking the responsibility to understand what's most urgent to the business and talking about learning constantly through that lens of, you want to accomplish this. This is the direct correlation to that thing. So my argument would be that, yes, COVID was the most holistic, uniting, urgent experience any of us have ever experienced in our careers, I assume. But my forward-facing look would be, just because COVID is no longer the red flag in front of us, urgency still exists. Every senior leader, every executive has things that keep them up at night. Every executive has KPIs or OKRs or budget or things that they are trying to drive for the business. And whether it's what they're trying to drive in the next year, or if you're that, visionary leader who's thinking 5 and 10 years down the road, what that says to me is that our responsibility and our burden as learning leaders becomes being detectives about what is every single executive who we support, who our teams support, considering to be most urgent. And if we can do that, and if we can reframe, a customer service training is an essential skill, that's great. You might feel like you don't need to do a ton of explanation about why customer service training is important. My argument would be that every program should lead with how it solves for an urgent issue or goal within the business. And so again, COVID being gone, we just need to reframe and challenge ourselves, in my opinion, to there is something that keeps you up at night, Madam Executive, how can we help? And constantly talking through that lens and never letting a learning and development roadmap or program conversation go by without hitting on whatever that urgent thing is.
I think that's a really helpful perspective to take on it. In a way, the pandemic has unified us in so many ways. And one of those ways is that we're all much clearer about the connection between L&D initiatives and the business's needs. But ultimately, that we're all aiming for that, right? We've always been aiming for that. And what you're speaking to, what I'm hearing from you anyway, is like, let's do a better job going forward of making sure we very clearly tie even more clearly than ever, I should say, tie our initiatives to the business's most urgent needs. And that's really what COVID represents. It just was unifying in some ways, but it's the same thing going forward, whatever the current urgency is, right? Thanks for that. I want to leave a few minutes for questions in case we have any, and I want to be respectful of the time. Bobby, have you had any questions come in that maybe we can address in a few minutes?
Yes, Daniel, we actually have had a few come in. Thanks for breaking there so we could get a couple of them in. I'll start at the top, came in early in the discussion about traditional learning theories and styles and experiential learning cycles. Are they still relevant in a virtual environment?
Happy to share some thoughts on that. As I think about some of the traditional, I'll call it just methodologies and tactics for learning, I think some of them still really do have a lot of relevance. And maybe not so much in terms of the specifics of what we do, but in terms of the philosophy that's rooted behind them. And how do we as learning and development professionals kind of take that step back and think about the learner's journey that perhaps was reflected in some very specific recommendations on how you would deliver learning in the past in in-person settings, and think about how do we bring a learner forward in a way that they're psychologically comfortable and eager to learn, and in a way that helps them to also balance the attention that it requires to learn in this different setting. So I think there's still relevance, but I think there's a lot to be written on what we've learned through this period of time as well. I think they're complementary, but I think there's a lot that we've experienced in this time that would add to some of those traditional methodologies.
Jennifer, I can't wait to read a book 10 years from now on teaching in the time of COVID. That will be a book I will purchase. But I absolutely agree with you on the fact that it's complementary. And I do actually think some of the learning methodologies remain super important as well. It may be even more important than it can almost become, and I hate to use the word lazy, but it's the only word coming to mind right now, is a webinar experience. If you're doing a webinar over and over and over again, some of those really important learning methodologies might just slip away and you might just get into a very standard approach. Whereas if we are keeping those learning methodologies front of mind and what we know about how learners engage with, absorb learning, we can unlock more than just, okay, everyone hop on Zoom, we're going to roll through this PowerPoint, which we know doesn't work. So I actually believe that keeping those learning methodologies right here with us as we go through the virtual learning experiences is super critical, so that we don't just do that ad hoc, okay, everyone jump on Zoom, I'm going to talk to you about 30 slides real quick.
The
So,
way I see it is we have a lot more tools in our toolbox than we've ever had before, much more proven tools now. And as we move forward into some new version of normal, it's going to be about picking the right tool at the right time for the given program, the given business needs. And I think we have more options than ever, and there's room for all of them. It's just a matter of picking the right mix.
Yeah, and I don't know how much it was touched on during the session today or any of the previous sessions, but we had a really good question come in, and I can pose that to any or all of you. The person asking the question was interested to hear how you're integrating mental health into micro learning and different learning methodologies. Any thoughts on that?
Be happy to share some of the things that we're doing. One of the biggest concerns I think we had as we came into this period of time was around the mental health of our employees, our associates. We wanted to make sure that people knew as much work as there seemed to be, we wanted them to put themselves first and care for themselves, right? Our organization is extremely fortunate. We have over 400,000 people, and I have not met all of them. Those who I have met, they all have the same passion for helping our customers. And I think in a moment of need, like what we experienced in COVID, that can be overwhelming, right? In a normal setting, that's a really good thing. In an emergency setting that is really long-term, it's something you have to be aware of and really help people think through. When we started our micro-learning journey, one of the areas that we focused on were different tools and resources to help people to deal with the pressure and the stress of this environment. We also have piloted some different workshop content as well to give people an opportunity to really immerse in some methods and approaches to help to prioritize things, to reconcile everything that's happening around them, and some tools and tactics to have that sustainable performance. I think there's always more we can do in this space. And I think the space is continuing to evolve as well, looking at some of the different content providers that are out there and some of the other methodologies. I'm curious from Amy and Tomissa if they have any reflections they can share on the work that their companies are doing in this space too.
Yeah, at Kellogg's, I know there's a lot of work going on. I'm not as close to that area. Our HR group, supports that piece of it. But there was something just announced today, in fact, that we're joining forces with some other organizations to be able to offer more help to our employees around this. So it's definitely near and dear to my heart, and I'll be volunteering for any of those that come my way. So
yeah, and I can quickly wrap us up on that is we haven't necessarily integrated wellness into the learning component directly, where there's not necessarily like instruction or guidance. We certainly have resources around wellness. And Uber Freight is part of the broader Uber parent company. And Uber as an organization is just incredibly generous when it comes to wellness resources for employees. Everything from, we partner with Unmind currently, which is a meditation app. There are EAP and Lyra resources for if you need counseling, which is available to employees. We also have wellness benefits like the ability to use a stipend towards fitness, setting up your home office space, et cetera. And we also do have just a fabulous network of ERGs and culture committees who host various events, whether it's like guided meditation, Zoom yoga, really trying to, again, leverage the network and not just have that be centrally owned. We have a health and wellness committee where they've done, little challenges like walking challenges or get outside challenges, things like that. So I wouldn't necessarily say we've integrated it with learning specifically, but it's absolutely been a huge focus and highlighting resources on a recurring basis, whether it's a TED Talk, a podcast, an article, a tool, a tip. That has absolutely been a major focus since the pandemic began.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone on the panel. I always love these conversations. I learned a lot from the dialogue, and I hope the audience did too. Bobby, I want to be respectful of our time, so I want to pass it back to you.
All right, thanks, Daniel. Appreciate that. I guess all we can say about the panel is in one word, wow. As expected, it was a great discussion about optimizing L&D. Love how we covered the digital adoption, executive engagement, leadership development, and all the hybrid models. So on behalf of everybody in the audience and us at Opal Group, thank you so much for joining us, Daniel, Amy, Jennifer, and Tomissa. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you.